Denver Broncos quarterback Bo Nix spent some of his downtime picking the brain of Drew Brees. We're going to tell you about that and much more coming up on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It may be some ramp-up practices to start off training camp, but there are still standout players to talk about. Near perfect attendance out there on the field for the Denver Broncos, and Bo Nix taking that extra measure to be great as he enters year 2 of his NFL career. Broncos Country, welcome into today's episode of the show. My name is Sayre Bedinger. I'm the co-host here of Locked On Broncos, as well as the site expert at predominantlyorange.com. And as always, we appreciate every single one of you so much for tuning in and rocking with us every single day, especially all of you everyday listeners out there. And today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money and use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. And Broncos Country, the story of the day as Sean Payton met with the media for the very first time at training camp was his revelation that Bo Nix spent some time in the downtime, as the Broncos have had the last handful of weeks, hanging out with Drew Brees, where Drew Brees lives out in San Diego. Payton said that Bo spent 4 or 5 days with him, just kind of picking his brain and trying to hone his craft. And it's a really fascinating development because we already know that Peyton Manning is a sounding board for any Broncos quarterback, as he's an ambassador for the team and lives in Denver. He's frequently around the facility at practice and those sorts of things. But obviously, Drew Brees played in Sean Payton's offense. He worked with him for a really long time. So it's great to hear that Bo is out there kind of just picking his brain and getting to know maybe some nuances of the offense, maybe some nuances of what it's like to work with Sean Payton. Even after having been with him for the last year, there's still a lot that Bo Nix can really learn from a guy like Drew Brees, obviously being that he's a future first ballot Hall of Fame quarterback himself. And so just the fact that he's spending time with Drew Brees is really cool. And you love to hear that the young quarterback is taking those next steps towards whatever he can do to improve in 2025. And obviously spending time with a guy like Drew Brees is super helpful, but Bo wasn't stopping there to hone his craft, right? He also worked with former MLB pitching coach Tom House, who has worked with a ton of different NFL quarterbacks, actually, but some notable ones as well, like Tom Brady, and he currently works with Dak Prescott. He's worked with a number of other guys like Andrew Luck. He's worked with Drew Brees, of course. And so you have this young quarterback that's taking these measures to be better in year 2. And it's not just, well, I expect to be better because I'm in my second year in the NFL. And we heard Bo Nix talk about at the end of last season how he really felt like things were slowing down for him. And I think that's so important, but I also think it's important not to just assume that, okay, well, because things slowed down for me at the end of last year, I'm just going to be able to kind of figure things out here in year 2. I already know the offense, but Bo is taking extra measures to work harder at being better. And we know that there were throwing sessions with him and the skill players, although unfortunately we don't get to see much behind the scenes of that. But we know that Bo was working with the skill players on offense to improve their chemistry together and just kind of spend some time bonding together. We know he's taking trips with some of his teammates, Mike McGlinchey, they're pretty chummy. They're good friends. Their wives are all good friends. Him and Jarrett Stidham, the same thing. And so you see these guys taking measures to improve, not just on the football field, but also in terms of their chemistry. And Bo Nix is really leading the charge. And it's fascinating because the timing of this is really interesting, as you don't want to put any other players down to prop somebody up. But I do think it's important to point out this bit of contrast that we have here, as there was a report out of Chicago Bears camp from Courtney Cronin that talked about the fact that Caleb Williams was given basically some homework by Ben Johnson as he left for his break, and they're talking about he's got to improve his footwork. That was a big deal in why he was getting, sacked as many times as he did last year, as well as improving some of the short throws that he missed at OTAs. But one thing that really stood out is that Caleb talked about the fact that he was basically saying, hey, if you can't spend 30 to 60 minutes watching film every day, you don't necessarily deserve your position as a starting quarterback in the NFL. And isn't it nice to know that we don't necessarily have to worry about Bo Nix spending time watching film, right? I mean, again, I don't want to put down a guy like Caleb Williams, who we wish the best for Caleb and hope that he has a great career with the Chicago Bears and it works out for him and Ben Johnson, other than the times that they're playing the Denver Broncos. So don't want to put another young player down, but you really get a sense in how hard Bo Nix works and the mentality, the mindset that he has, why it was so important in the first place for a player or for a coach like Sean Payton to meet Bo Nix and ask him, hey, what's in your backpack during the pre-draft process? And to see that it's all football related stuff. It has nothing to do with his vices or whatever they may be. Like, Bo Nix is all about getting that work in, improving, being better. There was a documentary released last year as well on YouTube that kind of outlined Bo Nix's pre-draft process. And you can just tell this guy gets it at such a young age to understand that to be in that small, very, very small percentage of players at the quarterback position who are truly great in the NFL, you have to work in such a way that very few people will ever work. There's a leadership principle that says if you want what few people have, you have to do what few people do. And Bo Nix exemplifies and embodies that. He's taking these extra measures that are very Peyton Manning-esque and very Drew Brees-esque, to where, all right, I want to get better in terms of being a passer or a thrower of the football. So I'm going to hire Tom House as a consultant to coach me up in this way. I want to get better at understanding Sean Payton's offense. So I'm going to go to the guy that understood it better than anybody for a longer period of time than anybody has ever played with Sean Payton, right? So you see Bo Nix taking these steps and these measures to be better in year two. It's not just going to be his overall rating jumped in Madden. It's not just going to be experience has caused me to just naturally be better at what I do. It's not just a byproduct of time, right? And Bo Nix understands that. He understands that you have to actively go out and chase that level of greatness that he wants to achieve at the NFL level. Sean Payton talked about the sophomore slump, and he was asked a question about that, and he's like, I can't really think of any examples of that. I don't believe in it, sort of thing. And it's really a matter of the development in the NFL, and we talk about this often on this show. Development and progression in the NFL or in pro sports in general is not always, and maybe even rarely, linear, right? We expect these guys to just year after year, your overall rating, just like it does in video games, should improve year after year after year, and you should just keep getting better and better and better. Sometimes guys do take steps back. Sometimes guys do struggle in year two because defenses and defensive coordinators have more tape on them. They attack them in different ways. And so they're now seeing different looks than they did when they were rookies. And that may be something that Bo Nix has been studying up on. And of course, you have a top 3 defense, hopefully number 1 ranked defense in 2025 to go up against every single day in practice, and then pick those guys' brains as well of, hey, what would you throw at me if you were playing against me, So I really love that Bo is taking these extra measures to be great. He's not just expecting progression. He is actively chasing progression. And I think that should excite everybody in Broncos country as he's working with Drew Brees, working with Tom House, who was formerly Nolan Ryan's pitching coach once upon a time. So, and actually worked with Tim Tebow as well, among the quarterbacks that he has worked with. So definitely notable Broncos country that our starting quarterback in 2025 is taking all of these measures during his downtime to get better and better ahead of the 2025 season. And the Denver Broncos, as they were out there, not just Bo Nix, but nearly perfect attendance for day one of their sort of ramp up practices as they started training camp. We're going to talk about Dre Greenlaw hitting the field for the very first time, as well as a couple of other guys who are back out there on the practice field, coming up next on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? Well, with Monarch Money, it can, because whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money, it's so much more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all your accounts, your investments, and your spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. And you know what makes it really easy is having everything in one app, because oftentimes if you try to track all these things in different apps, you just kind of get worn out of checking all these different things. Having it in one app is super helpful to manage your money day to day. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Today's show is also brought to you by Rugiet. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them, but if you're looking for something that's beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. And unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average in 15 minutes. And effects can last up to 36 hours so that you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. And anytime you're getting ready to make a purchase like this, one thing I know is that you want to read customer reviews. You want to know testimonials of how things have worked, and you can read those customer reviews on Rugiet's website, and it helps people feel more confident and present in the moment to do so. So head to rugiet.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Rugiet website for full safety information. The Denver Broncos had near perfect attendance at day one of the training camp ramp-up practices, with only A.T. Perry starting off on the PUP list. Broncos Country, we're going to talk about players that were out there on the field for the first time or back out there on the field after missing some time in mandatory minicamp. But first, want to just once again say thank you to all of you everyday listeners out there. If you haven't already done so, man, we'd really appreciate if you hit subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as on YouTube, and get us at the top of your algorithm. Follow us on TikTok as well. We're going to have content for you all off-season long, Broncos Country. But one of the most important things about training camp is having perfect attendance, or as close to perfect attendance as you can possibly have. I was chatting with a group of friends about training camp and just the excitement of Denver Broncos being back out on the field and football being back into the air. And, you know, they were saying that it's my friend Steven. So shout out to Steven, but he was talking about the fact that, you know, I don't necessarily care about training camp stats, don't necessarily even care about all the training camp highlight worthy plays. What I really care about is that we get the group that we have to week one fully intact, or as close to fully intact as possible. And I thought that was kind of a great point, because, you know, yeah, you do want to see guys step up in training camp. You want to hear about guys making an impact, but more than anything, don't we all want that very same thing? We want this team to be perfect attendance. We want this team to get to week one fully healthy. And that's what every NFL team wants. And Mike McGlinchey talked about that when he spoke to the media on Tuesday as well. He talked about the fact that in the NFL, to get to the Super Bowl, you know, one of the biggest things that you need is a bit of luck. And what he's saying is not just in games, not just in situations where you have the ball bounce your way, but I think staying healthy in the NFL, as much as you can control the controllables, it does require a bit of luck to get the right guys to the end of the season, to that finish line point, to the point in, you know, mid to late January where you're still playing football and your key core players are still out there on the field. And so, yes, the most important news that we can have every single day, Broncos Country, at training camp is not which undrafted free agent is stepping up today, which guy is really having a great series of practices, how are the receivers doing? You know, The most important thing is these guys staying healthy and having good attendance at every practice. And of course, a number of notable names that we would be looking at would obviously be Dre Greenlaw, who was out there on the practice field. Again, Sean Payton talked about the fact that there's a handful of different guys that fit in they've been injured, they have injury history, or they're veterans that are going to be monitored and sort of on this injury pitch count during training camp. And it wasn't just about Dre Greenlaw, but there's going to be a number of different guys whose training camp reps essentially are monitored very closely. And I think that's a good plan to have. It's not new. This is not new to Sean Payton. It's not new for the Broncos. They've done this for years with certain players. So there's certain guys that we'll hear about getting a day off here and there, or maybe other players get an opportunity to rotate in with the top defense, top offense, whatever it may be. It's going to be very normal for the Broncos to do this. It's not going to be a surprise. And certainly Sean Payton is typically coy about injuries anyway, so we may not know anyway, but Dre Greenlaw and Talanoa Hufanga, two major additions to the defense that can really vault that unit from the third ranked in terms of points allowed last year up to the top of the league, I believe, this coming season. They were out there on the practice field together for the first time as Broncos. Word has it from our good friend Ryan Edwards that Hufanga looked really good. Greenlaw obviously just kind of getting back out there for the first time. And these guys, they're not in pads. They're not doing any sort of, it's going to take some time before the Broncos or any team in the NFL, really, other than the teams that are playing in the Hall of Fame game here, which is just over a week away. It's going to take some time before they get to like true full speed football stuff. So as of right now, those guys out there on the practice field together. Devon Vele, who missed mandatory minicamp with an undisclosed leg injury, he was also back out there for the Denver Broncos offense, which is great to hear. That full attendance. Once again, it's everybody. It's 90 players, even though the Broncos have 91 because they have the international player exemption right now on punter Jeremy Crawshaw. It's a full attendance out there for this team. So those young receivers, they're going to be getting into competition very, very soon. But perhaps the most important group of players that we're wondering about their attendance at training camp are the guys that are in contract situations, right? You want to know about the Cortland Suttons, the Zach Allens, the Nick Bonitos, John Franklin Myers. All of those guys were out there for the Denver Broncos as they got set with this first ramp up practice. And Sean Payton was asked about them after practice. Well, specifically, he was asked about Cortland Sutton, and he said, you know what, there's a lot of these guys that are in contract situations. So I'm just going to tell you right now that those things are going on behind the scenes, right? He basically said, and I'm paraphrasing what he said, but Payton essentially did confirm that all the players that are in contract situations are present and accounted for, but he also talked about how those deals are currently being worked on. So I think we're to assume with guys like that, we already knew that from Nick Bonito himself. We heard that from our good friend Mike Kliss about Cortland Sutton, that those two guys' contract situations, contract talks, they seem to be ongoing and productive behind the scenes. We didn't know anything about Zach Allen or John Franklin Myers. And according to what we heard Sean Payton say today, if we're to take him at that face value there of like, hey, there's a number of guys in contract situations, it's all being worked on. I took that as Zach Allen and John Franklin Myers, they have ongoing contract negotiations behind the scenes. And interestingly enough, with Zach Allen, it's Sean Payton said it's not a comparable situation, but again mentioned the snap count from last year, how they probably had him playing too many snaps. So he's now said that about Bonito and Zach Allen in terms of maybe keeping them on a bit more of a pitch count with their snaps. So should be seeing a lot more of some of the other guys off the edge and on the defensive line, where the Broncos are thankfully extremely deep this coming season. But I mean, you tell me, Broncos Country, let us know on social media or in the comments section over there on YouTube if you really feel like, hey, what Sean Payton said, I took it the same way as you did, or I took it differently. Do you believe that he's kind of keeping Zach Allen and John Franklin Myers in that same group there with the Cortland Suttons and the Nick Bonitos in terms of those contract talks are ongoing? We might see a lot of big checks being written by Greg Penner and the Walton family ownership group in the near future there, Broncos Country, because those guys are core pieces of this roster. They're not just nice to have around for the time being. They are core pieces of what this team is doing, and they fit within this window. The Broncos, they've rejected trade offers for Courtland Sutton. They have obviously drafted and developed Nick Bonito into a defensive player of the year candidate. Zach Allen signed him when he was sort of an afterthought of the Cardinals, and he's become an all-pro player. John Franklin Myers, one of the most consistent defensive linemen in the NFL, and all of these guys are under 30 or really close to 30, and so they're entering some prime years of their career. So very exciting to hear Sean Payton say that, even if it doesn't necessarily mean anything for the immediate future. It's obviously those guys are all out there on the field. He says contract talks are happening, so therefore we're to assume that those contract talks are probably going well if they're practicing, unlike with the Cincinnati Bengals and Trey Hendrickson, who literally left Cincinnati for Florida. So Broncos country, it's exciting. This team is out there. They're practicing. Broncos football is back in the air. Who were the biggest standouts from day one of these acclimation practices? A couple of pass rushers stood out to our good friend Ryan Edwards, and J.K. Dobbins finally out there in uniform, practicing, running around with the team. We're going to tell you all about it on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. Fantasy football is back. So fire up the group chat, get your draft board ready, and buckle up for a season filled with breakouts, busts, and all the overreactions we all live for this time of year. It's all going down on Yahoo Fantasy. This year, me and some buddies were playing on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or if you're a veteran making your millionth league, right? And it's very, very easy to use. I've used Yahoo Fantasy since 2008, essentially, right? And it's one of the smoothest apps that you've ever seen in terms of fantasy football. Easy setup, great mobile app, and the Smack Talk just hits a little different on their message board, right? And so to celebrate 28 years of fantasy greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days, giving you more ways to play, more ways to draft, and more ways to win. It all begins August 4th. So stay tuned and get started by creating or joining a Yahoo Fantasy Football League at yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. That's yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. And let's make this fantasy season the best one yet. Couple of pass rushers may have been standouts on the first day of ramp-up practices for the Denver Broncos, who are on the field finally for training camp. Broncos country, football is back in the air, and you know what? I think we can officially say we are back. It's exciting. Football games, they begin just over a week away, the Hall of Fame game. Very, very fun times ahead, and the Broncos, they're expected to be a lot better this coming season, and a lot of guys that we saw finally on the field for practice are going to help this team get to that point. And of course, one of the biggest strengths of this team, and we did a preview recently on the edge position for the Denver Broncos, they are deep off the edge. They have top end talent. Obviously, we talked about Nick Bonito could be in line for an extension very soon. Jonathan Cooper, he already got an extension last year. He was apparently one of the top standouts from the first day of training camp, as our good friend Ryan Edwards pointed out that, man, Jonathan Cooper's motor just really stands out. And he said the same about Dondre Tillman, how Dondre's kind of one of those underrated, understated guys that doesn't get talked about too much, but I think Dondre Tillman is a player to watch, Broncos country, during the training camp. I mean, just overall, but also when the Broncos get out there for preseason games, when they get out there for joint practices, I would not be shocked in the slightest if you constantly are reading updates saying, man, Dondre Tillman blew up this play, would have been a sack by Dondre Tillman in a game situation, would have been this by Dondre. I mean, Dondre Tillman is that type of guy who he just has that sort of feel to him where he's so under the radar that what he did last year is almost being written off as all right, it was a one-hit wonder sort of deal, right? I feel like Dondre doesn't get talked about enough by really anybody, but I'm not trying to make a mountain out of a molehill either. It's a situation that he's got a great opportunity to be that top reserve pass rusher off the sideline for the Broncos. And as we've heard Sean Payton talk about pitch counts for Nick Bonito, and you expect that to be the case for obviously Jonathan Cooper as well, I think somebody like Dondre Tillman is set for a massive season in terms of what the Broncos are going to ask him to do, how much they're going to ask him to do, and what he's capable of, because he showed last year in limited snaps that he can be really effective as a pass rusher, as a run defender. So really great to hear that Dondre is off to a good start. From everything that I talked about with Cody as well, when he was out there at mandatory minicamp, sound like Dondre had a good minicamp. You see his work ethic. He's been at the facility all offseason if you follow him on TikTok. So Dondre, he's going to be one of those guys to watch. Another guy that made an impression was obviously J.K. Dobbins, and it wasn't just an impression for the fact that, well, he looked great out there, because the running backs and everybody, nobody's in pads yet, so you're still waiting for that. But Sean Payton complimented J.K. Dobbins as being a quick study, and it was important for him to get the playbook when he did back at mandatory minicamp, to sign at the end of mandatory minicamp, because he's had the last 5 weeks to really digest the playbook. And for Payton to say that he's a quick study, man, that is great news for all of Broncos country that's excited to see what Dobbins can do in orange and blue. I do believe that Dobbins is shaping up to be the guy who runs out of the tunnel with the starting lineup in terms of the running back position, although we know that running back in the NFL, it's not like it was in the early 2000s where you have a bell cow back and you're going to give a guy 350 carries. It doesn't necessarily matter who runs out of the tunnel with the starting lineup. But at the same time, I do believe that Dobbins, him coming out of the tunnel, is sort of representative of what I think he's going to be for this team, is that tone setter, the floor raiser, the guy who brings, top 5 last year in yards after contact per rushing attempt, top 5 or top 10 in broken tackles. I mean, he was outstanding for the Chargers. And unfortunately for him, the Chargers didn't recognize that. They brought in Najee Harris, draft Omarion Hampton, and so he's kind of once again an afterthought. So maybe that puts a little bit of an extra chip on his shoulder as he comes to Denver and brings that exactly what the Broncos need at running back, right? Last year, Broncos were terrible in yards after contact, yards before contact. I mean, any metric that you can look at when it comes to the running back position, they were just flat out bad. And J.K. Dobbins is somebody who's going to help change that. Now, of course, everyone in Broncos country wants R.J. Harvey, a second-round pick, to become that, next Alvin Kamara or whatever it may be in Sean Payton's offense. You want to see him develop into a 3-down back that you can trust immediately with 200-plus touches. But you know what? It's not such a bad thing to say, let's acclimate him at the pace that we want instead of just throwing everything at him immediately. Literally, you want that guy to develop and grow, and shoot, if he becomes what Bucky Irving was for the Bucs last year, that'd be great. If he takes a little bit more time and is a player that just contributes significantly in the opportunities that he's given, we'll take that as well, because you really also hope that J.K. Dobbins can be a great featured back for your offense. And so nice to see him out there at practice, couple of videos surfacing of that. And then it sounds like from multiple people that were in attendance for the media, Zach Stevens, Luka Evans, and others, sounds like the play of the day was a long throw from Bo Nix to Adam Troutman, of all people, right? It's kind of funny. We've talked all offseason about, well, Adam Troutman offers very little in the passing game. Maybe there's more that he can bring to the table with other guys opening things up. I know that Troutman is not a dynamic athlete as compared to somebody like an Evan Ingram, but he should be a better pass catching option than we've seen, right? I mean, last year, Lucas Krull led that group with 19 catches. I think that was not indicative of what Adam Troutman is capable of doing in terms of being a more consistent option in the passing game. Maybe he deserves some more love and some more opportunities, although certainly don't want him to be a primary weapon for your passing game. I think as a secondary option, as somebody who can kind of catch defenses sleeping, I think there's maybe some untapped potential there with Troutman heading into year 2 of the Bo Nix era in 2025. And Broncos country, the acclimation period continues on Thursday as the team will be doing yet another ramp-up practice. And we'll hear from different players as well, and we'll get some more insight into how things went at practice, who stood out, who's already making waves, right? And we do all want to know that, not just that the team has great attendance, but that the guys that are in attendance are out there making plays and getting this team ready to make a run in the AFC West. But we appreciate you so much for tuning in today. Broncos Country, we'll catch you on the next episode of the show.